Every 40 seconds, one person around the world commits suicide. So I'm going to repeat that. Every 40 seconds, one person around the world commits suicide. So why am I talking about that today? I've worked in the area of mental health for the last decade now as an advocate and an ambassador. And I got into that area because I suffered myself from a whole range of issues that has taken me a lifetime to learn to understand. And it really sent me down a very difficult path. It made growing up really hard because I didn't understand why I thought this way. As far back as I can remember, I've had issues with anxiety, overthinking, OCD, compulsive thinking, putting pressure on myself, not feeling like I fitted in. And it really manifested in different ways growing up. The only thing that I found as a kid that gave me that release, I guess, to get out of my head was competing in sport. And from a very young age, I wanted to be a professional athlete, originally wanting to play AFL football. And I trained so hard at doing it that I became so fit that I started winning all of the middle distance running races. And then I quickly decided I now want to be a middle distance runner. And I got results. I competed at an Australian and international level. I was Victorian champion at one point. But it came at a cost. I was training myself into the ground. This was my coping mechanism that I didn't even know that I had. From the age of 11 till about 16 or 17, I'd be getting up at 2:30 or 3 in the morning, hiding bricks under my bed, training, doing all these weird exercises for 3 or 4 hours before I'd hear my mum get up. She knew, how big of a problem it was. Everyone around me knew. I knew it was a problem, but it was an addiction. It was, again, like I said, the only way I knew how to cope, and the only way I knew how to feel in control when I felt so out of control. And I would hear her get up, I'd go for a run for an hour and a half, I'd go to school, I'd go to training that night, triple what my coach gave me, and most nights I'd get home and I couldn't even walk myself to bed, I'd be that exhausted. And it didn't make sense, it wasn't logical, I knew it probably wouldn't help me get better results when I was competing, but like I was saying, it was this thing where I just had to do it. It was an addiction and it was the only way I knew how to free my mind for that small period of time. I didn't feel like I could fit in. I didn't know how to relate to people. I socially didn't develop. A lot of issues came from this behaviour. I missed out on all those developmental years. I couldn't look someone in the eyes and have a conversation. I was lucky I had about 2 or 3 close friends. Apart from that, I couldn't relate to people. It stunted my growth. At the age of 16, 17, I was still built like a 12-year-old because I was punishing myself to that degree. And I'd also grown up with a father who was a public figure, and that added another layer to it because having the personality I have, I wanted to find a way to step out of his shadow, and I was just punishing myself to try and get results as a byproduct of that. When I was finishing up at school, my body had broken down. I had to stop training, stop competing altogether. I just completely worn myself out. And that was really when the problems began. I finished up at high school, went overseas on a gap year, deferred from university, came back early because I wasn't coping, dropped out of this course, and then I went through a 4-year period where I was doing absolutely nothing. I discovered alcohol for the first time. That almost overnight turned into an addiction where I was drinking 6-7 nights a week and using alcohol to cope. Again, I wasn't able to relate to people. I didn't know who I was. I was in so much pain, felt so much shame and guilt that alcohol was the only way I knew how to temporarily stop it, but it came with enormous problems. I was weekly getting into really dangerous incidents, sometimes life-threatening incidents at one point, almost killing myself and my friend in a car crash, and many other incidents that if I look back on it now, I'm surprised I even came out of it alive. I'm so thankful that I did. Not long after this, I was in a state where I was almost catatonic. My parents had to intervene and force me to go and get help. I found out I was severely depressed. I got working through it and I enrolled in another course at university. This time it was a business entrepreneurship course. Luckily got into it. I was still really struggling, but just had to find something that could give me some sort of purpose, something to do. And I got into this course and found out I found out 2 weeks before it started that we had to do 15 oral presentations in the first semester. And these were only in front of 5 people at a time. But at this point in time, my biggest fear in the world was communicating even one-on-one with someone. It was just beyond even comprehension to me. and I was panicking and I was trying to pull out of the course. I met the course coordinator trying to pull out of it. I almost did pull out of it, and the only reason I didn't was because at this point I now had my mum, my best friend, my psychologist really supporting me and willing me to go and do it, because they knew as well as I did if I pulled out of that course, it was a bigger issue than just wasting a bit of time and dropping out of another course. It was almost life and death, because I would have gone back into the same behaviour patterns and potentially not even come out of the whole thing. So that support system got me through it. And I remember I'd have these speeches written out word for word. I'd be standing there and literally vomiting before I'd go out and do it in front of 5 people, and I'd be shaking and reading it word for word and mumbling the words. I may as well have been speaking another language. I don't think anyone heard one thing I said. But I got through it, and I had to do these time and time again. I kept vomiting and going out doing an average job, but it taught me the biggest lesson I've ever learned in my life. And what that was is not listening to these thoughts that we tell ourselves and being able to, gain that self-awareness to question what we tell ourselves. My mind would be telling me, Nick, you're pathetic. You don't deserve to be out there. No one wants to hear a word you're saying. You've got nothing good to offer. You've got no natural ability. You should not be up here. But I had to, in this extreme situation, confront that and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And eventually I got okay at doing this. And it ultimately did teach me that lesson that I just think is something that I use day to day, in my life now. And it's been, like I said, the most important thing I've ever learned. And I got through that course and I actually became okay, comfortable at talking in front of people. And not long after that, I was in the media and I was asked to go on a reality television show called Dancing with the Stars. I instantly said yes to doing it because I thought, okay, here's probably the closest opportunity I'm going to get to doing something where it really allows me to, compete. The closest thing to when I used to compete in sport that I can't do anymore. So I said yes to it. I went to bed, woke up in a cold sweat thinking, what the hell have I got myself into here? I just got over this speaking thing. Now I have to go and dance on live TV in front of 3 million people, live audience. I don't even dance if I'm out with my friends. Yep, I'm in trouble. And I went through the same process, panicking, calling up the producer, about to pull out of doing the show. And the only reason I didn't was because I drew on my previous experience when I went to university and got over this fear of speaking in front of people. And that became the most important thing I've ever done for myself. And I thought, if that taught me those lessons, and this is so fearful, maybe if I can face that, I might learn something as well. And I didn't believe it because I was so terrified, but I just trusted that lesson. And I went and stuck to doing the show. That first episode, still the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Probably the worst dancer in the history of that show. I will never dance again. But I got through it, and it consolidated that lesson about not listening to these thoughts and really allowing yourself to just question things, come up with your own decisions, and be able to interpret things from your sort of viewpoint. Not long after that, I had really wanted to get into acting, and again, my mind was telling me, Nick, you're pathetic, you can't do it, no natural ability, you just learnt, you couldn't even communicate properly a couple of years ago, now you want to do this. And I was able to dismiss that and think, I won't be great, and I wasn't. I was pretty bad at the beginning, but I stuck to it. And I actually ended up landing work out of doing it eventually, but more importantly, it became, in line with the work in mental health, the other thing that I'm most passionate about doing now. And I wouldn't have found any of these things had I not been able to show vulnerability, to talk to people, to question these set thinking patterns that I had and go and put myself out there. And more fortunately, that led to me working in mental health. Like I said at the beginning, I've been working in this area now for almost a decade. I got asked to start talking at schools, at organisations. And the more I started doing it, the more alarming it was that this is something that affects so many people. And it's just something that I want to continue raising awareness about. So I feel very fortunate to do that work. But one thing that comes up through almost every day through the work that I do, whether it's at a school, an organisation, whether it's a child, an adult, is how many people are touched by suicide. And it doesn't matter whether you're from privilege, whether you're from poverty, doesn't matter what your situation is, it doesn't discriminate. And there are many reasons why people do it. It could be the kid at school that's being bullied. It could be your friend who's just had a relationship breakdown and feels like their world's about to end. It could be your friend who just lost their job and feels like they now have no self-worth. It could be from cyberbullying or through social media. The thing that shocks me when I go and talk at these schools is how many kids are affected by social media and in extreme cases suicide. Trying to compare themselves to this false image that it's not a real image, and they feel like they can't live up to it. They're not good enough because they can't live up to this image that isn't even real, and it's a terrifying thing. So if you guys take nothing else out of this talk today, the message I want to get across is that there is always help out there. There is always a way out. I know from what I've seen and heard that when people are in that situation, you don't go through with it unless you feel like there's no other solution. You're hurting that much, whether you've been hurting for a minute, an hour, a year, you're in so much pain that you feel like there's no other way out. And a lot of the time, they feel like they're doing a favour to those around them because they're a burden, and it's absolutely not true. There is always help and there's always a way out, and that's the message I really want to get across through what I'm talking about today. So I've got a quick story. It's not a good story, but the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is sadly one of the most common places people go to commit suicide. And over the years, there's been thousands of people that have jumped off the bridge. Of those thousands, there's been roughly 35 that have survived. And I learnt about this because I actually follow one of the biggest advocates in mental health in America, and he jumped off the bridge himself and survived. And one thing that came up from every single survivor when they were interviewed is that the second they pushed themselves off, they instantly regretted it. And that really shocked me, and I found it quite disturbing because, from that we can pretty safely assume that of those other thousands that went through with it, they probably felt the same thing. Again, there is always help out there. There's always a solution. There's always someone to talk to, and no matter how bad you're feeling, it's having that knowledge that this will pass. It always will. Things will always, be able to get better. And that could have been, the kid that was getting bullied. It could have been the friend at work. It could have been me if I hadn't gone and spoken up about what I was going through. If I hadn't eventually had the courage to go and talk about it, to get help, I can very safely say that I would not be standing here today talking to you guys. So I really think in this day and age, we need to be able to show more vulnerability. We need to be able to really connect. It's a crazy thing because we're in a world where we feel more connected than ever through technology. But we're becoming more disconnected. People don't know how to have a real conversation, don't know, and we're losing our values. And it's no individual's fault. This is a societal thing. We're taught that to be happy, you've got to have a bigger bank account, a bigger status, a bigger house, the best family, whatever it is. We're taught that you've got to get the best grades in school and go to the best university, get the best job, have the best family. That might work for some people, but there's no set formula about how we have to go about anything in life. There's a lot of talk in the world at the moment about building walls. Well, I think that we need to smash those walls down. We need to break walls. We need to start connecting again. We need to really be re-educated about what it is to connect and what's important and what's not. I think you can only really have 4 or 5 unconditional friendships and support from family or friends in your life because it takes so much effort. But that's unconditional, where you can count on that person no matter what you're going through, no matter what the time is, and vice versa. That's what's important, not having thousands of friends on social media, not having the biggest status. It's these real connections. One meaningful conversation with a stranger where you actually connect and show vulnerability and really have a real conversation. That's more powerful than having thousands of likes on social media, than having 1 million Instagram followers. It's a really important thing. For men, it is okay to cry. It's okay to show emotion. We've been taught that over the years that men are meant to bottle everything up and just push through everything, and showing vulnerability is a weakness. And it's absolutely not true. Whether you're a male or a female, we're all human, we all feel things, and we all should be able to express that. It's okay to fail at things. Often we learn the biggest lessons through failing. It's okay to not have all of the answers. I've never met anyone who does have all of the answers. I don't think that exists. I think that's the interesting thing about life. It's about learning as we go, and there's no right or wrong way to go about it. So what I'm talking about here today, this isn't new information. This is stuff that has been talked about for thousands of years by people that are far wiser, more articulate, and more intelligent than I am. But I think this message and these conversations right now are more important than ever. So I was looking up quotes the other day, and I came across one from the Beatles. I'm only 31, and I wasn't even born when they were around, but I grew up with my parents listening to them, and luckily, grew an appreciation for them. And I saw this quote, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was from their last ever recorded song on their last ever recorded album. But what the quote was the love you take is equal to the love you make. And I think that at this point in time is more relevant than ever. So I'm just going to finish up, go back to the statistic I said at the beginning of this talk. So around the world, one person commits suicide every 40 seconds. So I've been up here for almost 18 minutes now. So from the duration of this talk, that's about 27 people that have committed suicide as I've been standing up here talking to you guys. So again, something we need to think about. A change doesn't happen if we wait for society to change. It's about each and every one of us as an individual thinking, how can I make a little difference? If we all have that attitude, that's how you make a big change. That's how you change social structures. So thank you for listening today, and going back to that message, help is out there, and there is always a way to get through whatever struggle you're going through. Thank you.